Hello everyone, and welcome to my Week 2 Multimedia Discussion Board for MPA 545. Just a quick overview of my presentation. The 4 topics I chose was defining conflict, social exchange theory, conflict spirals, and factors that inhibit effective negotiations. So the first topic, defining conflict. So conflict is complex, and it can be brought on by different variables. It can be brought on by opposing views on a topic. It could be brought on by the way we communicate with each other or issues from the past. Conflict really surrounds us daily, and we work to navigate it in our personal lives and work, church, etc. And it's ever evolving, and it can actually lead to positive things. And the reference I found was on page 1 and 2 of the Eisenhardt textbook under the theoretical perspective section. The reference is by Fisher, Copeland, and Schneider from their book Beyond Machiavelli, Tools for Conflict. And in that book, they classified conflict as a growth industry. And what they meant by that is that conflict changes the dynamics of relationships over time. And over time, that conflict can actually lead to some very positive, productive, and prosperous times. And the example they used in the textbook was the conflicts in Europe during World War I and World War II, and how the relations across the European continent evolved from what it was during those times of conflict to now. And sitting in 1945, who would have thought that the relationship and the prosperity of that society between those European countries would be as good as they are right now, or even the conflict between U.S. and Japan and how our relationship with Japan is now compared to when we were at war. And I found this very interesting and true too as well. And when I think of conflict, I think of the negative aspects and the uncomfortableness before and during a conflict, and I don't really focus on what the positives that could potentially come out of the conflict are, and they're really unpredictable at times. Again, using the World War example. So the next topic I chose was social exchange theory. And social exchange theory is a thought that individuals use a cost-benefit analysis when interacting with others, aiming to minimize the cost and maximize rewards of their relationships. And to resolve conflict with the outlook of social exchange theory, parties will need to identify the interests and needs of each party to be able to come up with some sort of compromise or trade-off to come to an agreement. And to accomplish this, there are tools that individuals can use to persuade that exchange of resources and to come to that agreement that both parties can live with. And the persuasion tactic is what was studied by Miller, Boaster, Roloff, and Seibold in their academic journal, Compliance Gaining Message Strategies, which is the reference that's on page 8 of the Eisenhardt text under the social media theory, or the social exchange theory section. And this study reviewed 16 different persuasion tactics, which included promising rewards for compliance, threatening people for compliance, or the idea of owing someone for compliance, where I did this for you, you need to do this for me type of thing. And there was other strategies too as well. Like I mentioned, there were 16. And really the goal was to reduce that number of tactics down to a manageable few that can then be taught and used and repeated in various situations. And I found this interesting as there were so many tactics that I've used in various circumstances that I dealt with when dealing with people. But for me, what I tend to favor, due to my personality, which is the tactic of liking, and that's the tactic involves an individual being nice to get the other person in a good frame of mind, and they'll be more agreeable if they're in a good frame of mind. And whether that works or not is really based on the circumstances, but I found it interesting to be able to actually kind of read and study kind of a personality trait of mine in the text. So the third topic that I wanted to highlight was conflict spirals. And this section of chapter 2 of the Eisenhardt text looks at the concepts of the source of conflict. And specifically on page 17 under conflict spiral section, they discuss the importance of relationships and the effect of when people feel threatened or insulted during a conflict. And in these instances, people respond in a tit-for-tat manner, and when they are threatened or insulted, then they reciprocate with a threat or an insult, and then the conversation by both parties kind of gets consumed with the emotion of the situation, and then before you know it, it spirals out of control. And Alberts and Driscoll were cited in this section as they authored a journal called Containment versus Escalation, the Trajectory of Couples Communication Complaints. And this journal studied the behaviors that couples perform during moments of conflict and the sequence of events that occurred during that conflict. And I found it interesting that in that it highlights that an individual sequence of sequence that they follow is in response to how the complaint of the other person is delivered to them. And I found that interesting because I'm sure that if you're married or in a relationship that you've dealt with that just as I have. And again, it's one of those moments where as you're reading it, you can kind of see examples play up in your mind as you're reading the text and learning about it. And I thought that was interesting. So the final topic that I'll cover is factors that inhibit effective negotiation. And this can be found in chapter 3, page 54, under the section titled Factors that Inhibit Effective Negotiation. And it discusses how important it is for the negotiator to frame and present the problem in a positive and productive manner at the beginning of the negotiation, as it can have a huge impact on influencing the willingness of the other participant in the negotiation. And this section goes on to discuss the concept of selective perception, in which people will see what they want to see in data and hear what they want to hear when listening to the other side talk. And negotiations are prone to bias in the way that people perceive the situation, or how they perceive the range of outcomes or a likelihood of achieving them. And people's perception of the needs and interests will most likely determine the course of the negotiation. And this goes back to why it's so important in the opening for the negotiator to help really frame that perception for both parties. And the journal, the reference that I found is a journal by Michelini in 1971, Effects of the Prior Interaction, Contact Strategy, and Expectations of Meeting on Game Behavior. Studies the behaviors of players of a game when they have an interaction with the other person prior to a game and having an expectation of meeting after the game. And it found that the individuals that had that prior interaction had a more positive interaction during the game and promoted more cooperation throughout the event. And I found this interesting as imagining going into a negotiation with an individual that I knew or had a relationship with prior, and knowing that we're going to discuss the negotiations after will automatically alter both of our perceptions of the interaction and most likely make both parties more cooperative through the negotiation process. So thank you very much for watching my presentation, and I look forward to watching